Hi Mr. Jones, Jim here. This is going to be the first of what I think will be 3 videos introducing you to this new functionality, and I hope that these videos will help to document what it is I'm sending to you and give you a clear overview of what I designed and how to use it. This first video will be an overview of just the layout of what I've implemented here and what the new functionality does. Next video will be a quick guide as to how to use this in the way that I think you're most likely to use it, and the third video will be other ways to use the functionality and some tips for getting the most out of it. Okay, so as for the layout and overview of this spreadsheet, you'll notice that I've got a new worksheet in your workbook here called Spelling Check. And on Spelling Check, this is find and correct spelling variations between for artist and titles, right? So on this sheet, we have buttons that enable you to start a new spelling check using whatever settings you choose, to continue processing if you've paused a check that's ongoing, to make your spelling corrections, and to clear the table. Now, the reason I have this continue processing button here is because some of these checks can be quite long, especially if you start comparing artists and want to take into consideration what you call the context information of the title, or indeed vice versa if you're checking titles and want the context of the artist. So this quite dramatically explodes the number of potential matches and takes much longer to run. So as before, we have a status bar, but in this case you'll notice we'll pick up where we left off. We left off at 2% last time, and so now we're at 11%, and you can see the results are continuing to populate. So if I hit cancel, now we'll be updated here that we were 20% done with this, and if in the future we continue processing again, it picks right back up from there, so that you can do this incrementally if you like. Okay, so what check have we been doing in this particular illustration? Well, here, the way this table is laid out, entries on what we call the left side are being compared to entries on the right side, the entries on your table here, right? So in this case, we were comparing the values in the artist column in album CD to the values in the tapes column, the artist column in the tapes sheet. Now, I'll stress in this video, in the same way that I did in the email, every single value in the artist column in album CD is compared against every single value in the artist column in tape CD, so that you get a completely thorough check. The results that are returned here in the table depend on what you ask for. Here we've asked for, do you want to check all the artist and title combinations? This is what you refer to in your email as context. So if it's important to you to be able to separate, for example, all the different ways the Temptations can be matched against simply Temptations, you can see here that the Temptations found in the album A Song for You is found to match Temptations on each one of these individual different tape titles. This would enable you to make title by title decisions about whether you want to make a change or skip, and what kind of change. I'll illustrate this stuff in more detail later, but this just gives you an idea of what's been implemented here. And now let me just make sure we fully understand what all these columns mean. The score is, as we saw before, it's the strength of the match between the strings. In this case, Sugar Hill Gang matches Sugar Hill Gang with the space in there at a 0.9, so that's a pretty high match. So you can see that in album CD, the artist column in album CD is being compared to the artist column in tapes. So in album CD, this was found to match this, and here's the context, the title. Okay, so artist 1, title 1, and the first row in which that's found, artist 2 and title 2, and the first row in which that match is found. The next column is where you get to determine what operation you would like to perform. You can have a default operation specified here, and then you'll change any of these defaults to whatever kind of replacement operation you would wish to have. So let me explain very carefully what it means to say replace with. When you say in this first row that you wish to replace with the left, that means the left side is in some sense the authoritative side for this switch, right? Sugar Hill Gang with no space is going to replace Sugar Hill Gang on the right side in the tapes. So any place where Sugar Hill Gang on the title Apache shows up, it will be replaced with this. Skip means exactly what you think. Nothing will be done to it. And then and the choice here is to replace with the left. Oh, we just talked about the left. So the choice here is to replace with the right. Then in this case it means that The Temptations will be replaced with Temptations in A Song for You. Now this will be done it'll be done title by title because you've selected yes here, where you want to check all artist and title combinations. This is a setting that you can change. You can opt not to include that context. And then when you do that, you'll notice you receive much more compact findings here. You won't see the Temptations listed for A Song for You over and over and over again as it pertains to different tape titles. Let me just clear and start and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so that's enough results to see already quite easily that you got no context information taken into consideration for the matches. It simply finds an instance of The Temptations that matches Temptations, and here if you make any replacements, such as for example replace this value on the right, Temptations, in the tapes thing with this value from our album CD, The Temptations. This will be done every place that Temptations shows up. So that's a way to get many more spell checks done based on a single row, but it would not take into consideration the title information. So this is completely up to you, depending on what kind of operations, what kind of spell check replacements you're doing, and whether you need the title information or don't need it. Final thing I'd like to point out on the layout of this table is that the final column here is number of replacements. After you click make corrections to do the replacements that you've asked for here, this number of replacements column will report to you how many times those replacements were made for each one of these entries. You'll find that's the feedback that you get from that replacement. Now to complete a tour of the layout and operations on this sheet, let me lift back out of this table. Now that we understand what the results table is, that's really the central feature of the sheet. But now let's take a look at the other entries on this sheet and how you'll interact with them. Each one of these boxes that's in light blue is a place where you have a choice that you can make as a user. You can change the threshold by selecting from this drop-down box, and that just went off the screen of the video, but you'll see it on your computer. Same thing with this this other threshold value. We'll talk about that in another video. Here in this comparison box, compare artist and album C to artist and tapes. Here I've included a whole menu of different checks that this tool will support. It will also check the title in album CD and compare that to the record title and tapes, and it can also check values in these columns against themselves. So here if you check the artist and album CD to itself, this is a good way. For example, you might check within a sheet and see how clean your data is. Here's what that would look like if you run it. Okay, that's enough results to illustrate, and you can see here that artist column and album CD is compared to artist column and album CD. In other words, compared we're just looking at values within the column, and you'll see that within that column we have variations of Sugar Hill Gang and Temptations and Steve Miller Band, as we've seen before in our other testing. And as we saw, continuing to look at these places where you have user parameters to choose, as we saw when we were looking at the table, you can select here whether you want that context information considered and reported for both the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and you can decide what default action you would like put in for your in your table in your initial results. So if you think most of the things you're going to do is skip, then you might have skip as your default action. If you think most of your things that you're going to do is left here, then I'll just continue processing here, and you'll see the continuing results here will include left as the replace with action to start with. But again, as we previewed, when you make your choices about which replacements you want to make, you have the choice to decide for each one of these items which side you want to be the authoritative side, or if you want to skip. So we've seen illustrated already how the new check button works, how continue processing works, and of course clear table is just exactly what you think. When you clear table, you erase the results and you can start over. So that completes what I think of as an overview, a tour of this new functionality, and I'm going to record the next video that provides in more detail how to use this, followed by the third video that's a little bit more advanced look at ways in which you might get the most out of the tool.